Welcome to Word of Knowledge Christian Center, where we're helping to build a kingdom, not just a church, where Apostle A.C. Morgan is our pastor. Join us on WebEx on Sundays for our morning service at 10 a.m. and discipleship training, Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Listen to a Word of Knowledge broadcast on the radio or download the Wilkins Radio app. Just download the Wilkins Radio app or go to wilkinsradio.com.
Exciting news! A Word of Knowledge broadcast is now available on your favorite podcast platform: Apple, Amazon, Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. Just type in a Word of Knowledge broadcast in your podcast search bar. Listen on the go.
You are listening to a Word of Knowledge broadcast, and I am your hostess, Apostle A.C. Morgan. Thank you for tuning in to part 2 of Adversity Has Not Changed. And we're using the book of Nehemiah to show you how to handle adversity, whether it's adversity in your spiritual walk or adversity in your process of completing or walking out a ministry. It can be a clothing ministry, clothing closet ministry. It could be a feeding the homeless ministry. It doesn't matter. It could be a church ministry. Whatever the ministry is that God have you doing. This lesson is to show you what you should do when adversity hits, because it's going to do so. It's going to hit. No one is exempt. So don't step out thinking that it's going to be a bed of roses. It's like stepping out of your house and it's raining. Just because you stepping out of your house doesn't mean the rain going to stop. Same thing with the adversity. Just because you're starting to do a work that God has assigned to you does not mean adversity will not be there. Expect it. I often say in the book of Nehemiah shows us what to do when adversity hits. Christ showed us how to do it. Be prepared for it. Let's spend some more time in the book of Nehemiah seeing how he handled his adversity. I can't begin to emphasize enough that all the adversities that Nehemiah went through that we're going to discuss was during one mission from God. Sometimes we get upset because we have to go through one adversity. He went through many adversities in a short span of time, all because he was attempting to complete a mission that God had laid on his heart. Let's go over the first 3 forms of adversity that Nehemiah faced. Remember, the title of the lesson is Adversity Hasn't Changed. And as we go through these adversities, you're going to see they are still prevalent today. Satan is still using these same types of adversities against God's people today. The first adversity he encountered was in chapter 1. He asked his brother and a couple of other men from Judah, how was the Jews doing that had escaped and survived the captivity? Well, in response, the brother gave a very, very bad report on how they were doing. Verse 3 reads, the raiment there in the providence who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its fortified gates have been burned, destroyed by fire. And this grieved Nehemiah. Can you believe? The first test of adversity connected with this mission came with grief. I believe he wasn't expecting to hear something like that. Verse 4 says in chapter 1, now it came about when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying constantly before the God of heaven. So he was highly grieved over the report that he heard, a form of adversity. God hadn't even assigned the mission to Nehemiah yet. And there stood adversity front and center. Listen, Satan is going to try to discourage you before you even get started. Before God even tell you what he wants you to do, Satan is going to be working on you to keep you from fulfilling the mission of God. Again, that includes ministry as well as your spiritual walk. The second adversity that Nehemiah faced was when the two officials, Sanballat and Tobiah, became upset when they heard that Nehemiah had come to help the Jews. In verse 10, chapter 2 of Nehemiah, it says, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard this, it caused them great displeasure that someone had come to see about the welfare and prosperity of the Israelites. The third form of adversity he had to deal with came from those same two officials, but now a third official has joined forces with those two, and it was Geshem the Arab. The three officials joined forces, and now they launch a false accusation against Nehemiah, saying he was rebelling against the king. You can find the accusation in verse 19 in chapter 2. Now we're going to pick up in Nehemiah chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 1 through 23. The fourth adversity we can find in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Verse 1 says, but when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious, completely enraged, and he ridiculed the Jews. He spoke before his brothers and the army of Samaria. What are these feeble Jews doing? Can they restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the heaps of dust and rubbish, even the ones that have been burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, even what they are building, if a fox should get up on it, he would break down the stone wall. Of course, they're implying that the work that's being done is not going to last. Here is Nehemiah's response to what they were saying. Verse 4. And Nehemiah prayed, hear, O our God, how we are despised. Return their taunts on their own heads. Give them up as prey in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their wrongdoing, and do not let their sins be wiped out before you, for they have offended the builders and provoked you. Verse 6 says, so we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a heart to work. Have you recognized the common denominator in how Nehemiah handled adversity? He always turned to God no matter what was going on, no matter what his enemies were planning or plotting. He always took it to God first. He didn't panic. During the fourth act of adversity, they ridiculed the Jews and criticized their work. But let's see what they did during the fifth act of adversity. Verse 7 says, but when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on and that the breaches were being closed, they were very angry. They all conspired together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. We can see in verses 7 and 8 that the fifth adversity was a plot to come against Nehemiah and the workers and fight them, as they put it, to cause a disturbance with them. Let's see how Nehemiah responded to this adversity. Verse 9 says, but we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a God against them day and night. Then the leaders of Judah said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, and there is much rubble. We ourselves are unable to rebuild the wall. Okay, let's stop right here. So we're all on the same page. A burden bearer was an individual who carries a physical, emotional, or spiritual load, either for himself or on behalf of someone else. So here, the leaders are saying that the burden bearers, the ones that's supposed to be carrying the spiritual load, they are failing. In other words, their ability to carry the spiritual load is withering. To paraphrase, the ones who should have been encouraging the leader, they were saying things like, this is a lot of work. It's a lot to do. And we can't do all this by ourselves. Remember, I said that the adversities have not changed that Satan uses? This is how the conversation in verse 10 would sound today. Say the leader decides to plan a fundraiser for the building fund, and he or she might say, we're going to raise X amount of dollars. But in the background, the leader hears mumbling and grumbling from the people, saying things like, they want us to raise how much? We can't raise all that by ourselves. Instead of encouraging the leader, saying, oh, we can do this, we're going to work hard, they are mumbling and grumbling. It's really intended to discourage the leader, not necessarily from the one that is saying it or complaining, but from the enemy. We expect opposition from the outside of our circle, or at least we should expect opposition from the outside of our circle. But it's like we get sucker punched when the opposition comes from the inside of our circle. But we should be prepared for that also. Satan doesn't care who he uses. He loves using people on the inside of our circle because he knows we are least prepared for that. Verse 11 says, and this is still part of the adversity number 5. Our enemies said, they will not know or see us until we are among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. Here the enemy is still plotting and planning a surprise attack against Nehemiah and the workers. Adversity number 6 is an extension of the adversity Nehemiah went through in number 5. 12 read, when the Jews who lived near them came, they said to us 10 times repeatedly, from every place you turn, they will come up against you. In verse 12, the Jews in the area are coming to Nehemiah, letting him know that the enemy has planned to come and attack from every direction. But it says they came 10 times telling him this. Nehemiah really had to stay focused because he had people within his camp talking in his ear. He's hearing what the enemy is saying that they're going to do. I'm sure it took a lot of focus to keep his faith. Sometimes we have to know these people that we have to block out and not hear, because listening to them will cause your faith to waver. There are times that we must stop listening to outside voices. Let's see how Nehemiah responded to this opposition. Verse 13 says, so I stationed armed men behind the wall in the lowest places at the open positions where it was least protected. And I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. When I saw their fear, I stood and said to the nobles and officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Confidently, remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and with courage from him, fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Verse 15 says, now when our enemies heard that we knew about their plot against us, and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each one to his work. 16, from that day on, half of my servants carried on the work while The other half held the spears, shields, bows, and breastplates, and the captains were behind the whole house of Judah. Please tune in to part 3 next week. If you're interested in hearing this message or other messages that I have placed on the radio, I invite you to go to your favorite podcast form and key in a Word of Knowledge broadcast. You do not need to know which radio station or time you heard the broadcast. A complete list of titles will come up. If I have said something that in your mind is questionable or you want to know more about, I encourage you to get with God on it. Question Him. Ask Him to explain it to you. I can promise you He will explain it to you. You've been listening to a Word of Knowledge broadcast, and I am your hostess, Apostle A.C. Morgan.
Dr. A.C. Morgan, Ph.D., Apostle, and Arthur have a variety of books, workbooks, and study manuals available for purchase. I will, O Lord, magnify, exhort, and praise you at all times. The stages of your spiritual walk, preparing your spiritual walk in Christ Jesus. The Book of James, a study guide for the individual, small, and large study group. Discipleship Training Course 101. I hear what you're saying, but I don't understand. Discipleship Training Course, The Gospel of St. John. Spiritual First Aid Kit, a personal kit for the survivor. Proverbs, a book of wisdom. Insight from the wisest man of his time, Book 1. You can purchase these at wordofknowledge.net/store or amazon.com or Barnes & Noble.